Economic inequality. It's harsh for people at the bottom, but economic inequality is also about the squeeze in the middle, the substantial shrinking of our North American middle class. Both income and wealth inequality have risen to a record high. The gap between the richest and the poorest is now higher than it was during the 19th century, the era known as the Gilded Age of the rich industrialists, also called robber barons. It was not always this way. The period from the 1940s through the early 1970s is called the Great Compression. Workers had rising incomes, fueled by regular increases in the minimum wage and labor union contracts. Economic policies aimed to keep unemployment low. Government tax policy and regulations supported a growing middle class and kept a check on business. Important anti-poverty policies emerged out of President FDR's New Deal and LBJ's War on Poverty. These programs had a demonstrable impact on lowering poverty rates by the late 1960s, especially racialized poverty and poverty among the elderly. We also had more of a social safety net, albeit more limited than in the European Union. But since the late 1970s, we are in a period called the Great Divergence, one of rising income and wealth inequality. Why does rising inequality matter? Why should we talk about this? Economic inequality is deeply intertwined with the lack of opportunity, especially in Black and brown communities. Empirically, economic inequality is related to a slew of socioeconomic indicators. Societies with greater economic inequality have higher rates of gun violence and imprisonment, more drug addiction, lower food security, and lower indicators of both physical and mental health. Also, more equal societies have better educational performance, greater local economic development, higher child well-being, and more social mobility. Many researchers have documented these relationships. The outcomes I just mentioned are analyzed in a best-selling book titled The Spirit Level. This readable book is by British epidemiologists Richard Wilkinson and Kate Pickett. The book is available in 23 languages so far. The authors founded a nonprofit organization named the Inequality Trust to build better, more equal societies. Economic inequality became really apparent to me when I was in college. In my early years, I grew up socially working class. My parents are from Wilkes-Barre and Plymouth, Pennsylvania. My maternal grandfather was a coal miner. My grandmother worked piecework in textiles. My mother grew up in a large Polish Catholic family with an outhouse and chicken coop in the backyard. Her father, the coal miner, died when he was quite young, so my grandmother was a single mom from then on. My mother was the only one of her large family to escape the lack of economic opportunity in Plymouth. She received a nursing scholarship from College Misericordia in Dallas, Pennsylvania. My father enlisted in the Army, a way out for some working-class young men, and then attended King's College in Wilkes-Barre to get his college degree. By the way, the GI Bill that afforded him this option was written in a racialized fashion, but that's a story for another day. My youngest life was in a two-parent, dual-income family near Peekskill, New York. Mom was a nurse, Dad a middle school English teacher, so we entered the middle class. Still no family vacations, still no trips to the movies, but I did have violin lessons. My mother died when I was 11 and my sister was 7. Things were torn asunder. Long story short, my father wound up entering and ending 6 additional serial marriages over the course of the next decades. My teenage years were really distressing. My younger sister and I had unstable homes, moving annually from place to place. There was too little money, too little parental supervision, too much adult alcohol consumption, and abuse. I attended Wheaton College in Norton, Massachusetts as a scholarship kid. I declared financial independence when I was 17 because I was kicked out of the house by my second stepmother. This was hard for me emotionally, but also financially. It has affected my financial habits. I still have anxiety about paying my bills. Meeting the financial independence test helped me qualify for more student loans, so I graduated with really high student loan debt. Most of my classmates were from wealthy families. They wore Lands nightgowns, LL Bean duck boots, Calvin Klein or Gloria Vanderbilt blue jeans, Liberty of London dresses and skirts, and espadrilles. I never even heard of these. I became more and more aware of disparities based on class, and I began to study inequality and discrimination as an economics major. Fortunately for my survival, I had that inner drive to succeed all my life. I received a teaching assistantship in graduate school, so my tuition was free. I took out student loans for living expenses. Then I began a career teaching in academia and worked my way up to be a tenured distinguished professor of economics. Economic inequality is the overarching theme of my career. I have blended teaching and research with fighting for the working class, for low-wage workers, for working women, for anti-poverty strategies, and for pro-equality policies. I was able to use my education to advance. Many cannot. They do not have the same opportunities. In reflection, and only in reflection, it was not that hard for me to break away from my working class roots, but it was lonely. With the exception of 1 or 2, my extended family is primarily Catholic or a form of Protestantism, socially conservative, anti-gay, and anti-choice. I separated from them when I was becoming myself, a feminist, socially and politically liberal or even radical, and a lesbian. So I am thankful for my friends. While my personal story motivated my interest, I also graduated college and started graduate work in economics as the shift from the Great Compression to the Great Divergence was underway. The surge in economic inequality was unleashed by a form of capitalism called neoliberalism. Neo means new. Liberalism refers to an earlier version of small government theory, not what we usually think of as liberals today. This neoliberal era began with Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan in 1979 and 1980. Under neoliberalism, we had a resurgence of so-called free market capitalism, hearkening back to the 19th century. Under neoliberalism, government is the problem, not a way to solve problems. Under neoliberalism, regulation is bad, allegedly stifling corporate growth. Businesses like airlines and trucking and banking were deregulated. That's part of the reason we are without regulations for tech and social media companies today. Under neoliberalism, personal and corporate income tax rates were slashed, and there were government spending cuts, including a shrinking of our social safety net. Under neoliberalism, we are fixated on economic growth as a panacea for all social ills. Never mind that a rising tide does not lift all boats, or the effects of growth on the environment and climate. Under neoliberalism, workers were recast as individual entrepreneurs. Career-sustaining employment became more like gig jobs. We saw growth in part-time work, temporary contracts, adjunct work, seasonal work, irregular work with irregular schedules. More jobs came without benefits or with limited benefits. Workers bear more of the risk of these unstable labor markets. Under neoliberalism, we morphed from defined employee pension plans to 401k plans or do-it-yourself pensions. This also shifted the risk to workers. We have leaned toward individual responsibility and away from living as a member of a larger community. As a nation, we have moved away from caring for each other. We were sold this bill of goods by politicians, their donors, and network of economic think tanks that influence the public discourse. While neoliberalism emerged from the political right, both major parties in the US adopted variations of this worldview. As my economics colleague from the University of the West of England, Mary Wren, puts it, populations across the globe were socialized into swallowing and supporting stark inequality. How many of us have worried about money or paying a bill at some point in our lives or come up short one month? You can raise your hand. 17% of adults in the US report that they do not pay their bills in full every month. How many of us have fretted about debt, like credit card debt after a big purchase or a student loan? How many of us are afraid that we won't be able to afford to retire or that we will outlive our retirement income? We are not alone. Our economic and financial lives have been impacted by neoliberalism and discrimination. In the US, the majority of people today are living paycheck to paycheck. Only 1/3 of adults say they are living comfortably, and 4 out of 10 adults say they do not have $400 for an emergency expense. People of color and persons who identify as LGBTQIA+ report doing less well in financial well-being than white persons. This is not an individual person's flaw. The minimum wage in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia is still only $7.25 per hour. Unlike many other states, Pennsylvania state law will not allow us in Philadelphia to set our own city minimum wage. And $7.25 an hour amounts to just under $15,000 a year in gross pay. Folks who earn the minimum wage cannot make ends meet. This is not an individual flaw. When the economy is healthy, even when the economy is healthy, the Black unemployment rate is consistently nearly double the white unemployment rate. Food security is also twice as high for Black adults. Everyone, this is not an individual flaw. White families have higher average income and wealth than Black and Hispanic families. Black Americans are least likely to own homes, a legacy of institutionalized redlining and today's so-called reverse redlining, just a softer shade of red. It is not an individual flaw. In 2022, CEOs were paid 344 times as much as the average worker. In 1965, it was only 21 times as much. Struggling to make it in the middle is not an individual flaw. Younger generations are facing greater income instability. Younger adults are delaying marriages, putting off having children, and shelving buying a home. Young adults are saddled with high student loan debt alongside automobile debt and credit card debt. Young families face outrageously high costs for childcare, approaching levels equal to college tuition. These challenges are not an individual flaw. In Philadelphia, the poorest large city in the United States, these problems are exacerbated. We see this in the new State of the City report published by the Pew Charitable Trusts. These are not individual flaws. These are systemic. We should not leave our ethical principles in a box when discussing economics, and many of people of faith are not. In fact, the world's largest faiths have had much to say about what constitutes a moral economy. Roman Catholic theology has long advocated for economic justice, dating back to a papal encyclical in 1891 embracing living wages. In a keynote address in 2021, Pope Francis called for a just economy, including a universal basic income and shortening of the workday. The Protestant faiths have had a range of attitudes toward inequality. Some actually do view the accumulation of wealth as a signal of Christian virtue. However, others view Christianity as a motive for helping the poor. For example, the Episcopalian Church has an official network for economic justice and has passed numerous resolutions about living wages, income maintenance, and a more just economy. The African Methodist Episcopal Church, AME Church, has a long history of working towards systemic economic justice and trying to build wealth in the Black community through homeownership and business development, even minority-owned banks. In the Jewish faith, the Torah addresses economic equity and supports an economically just society with the ultimate goal of sustaining life and livelihoods. Jewish practices include periodic debt forgiveness. The Islamic faith believes in equal opportunity for all and meeting people's basic needs according to teachings from the Quran. Our UU faith. Our UU faith is aligned with my view of the world and my views about playing a role to improve the world, and I view that role as focusing on economic justice. Our new proposed UU values this summer, which are shortened to JETPIG, remember, include J stands for justice. We work to dismantle all forms of systemic oppression in ourselves and in our institutions. And by the way, the economy is an institution. E is for equity. Every person has the right to flourish with inherent dignity and worthiness. G stands for generosity. By recognizing we are interdependent, we covenant to share our resources. The UUA has a website devoted to our work toward economic justice, including a 2017 statement of conscience titled Escalating Economic Inequity, which is an update of our prior statements espousing a moral economic system. The UUA supports groups like the Poor People's Campaign and offers resources for congregations and members who want to explore the issue in greater depth. By drawing on these UU values, we can push back against the immorality of extreme economic inequality. Amen. The good news is that faith and love have spurred agency or action. People and organizations are now challenging neoliberalism, this 45-year-old approach to economic policy. We are advocating for economic well-being and reducing economic inequality. There are numerous organizations and movements working toward economic justice right here in Philadelphia. There's a new Philadelphia task force for slavery reparations. A wealth tax has been introduced in City Council Tax the Rich, PHL, is working on that campaign. The community-led 57+ Block Initiative is responding to the link between economic inequality and gun violence. I am a member of the Philadelphia Public Banking Coalition. Our current work with Power Interfaith is focused on moving money away from the big banks to more local, community, and minority-owned banks to make more loans in lower-income neighborhoods and communities affected by gun violence. The Philadelphia Association for Affordable Communities is working on housing justice. The Philadelphia Jobs with Justice Coalition fights for the fair treatment of working people, and many more. As we are able, as individuals and in this congregation, the movement for economic justice would welcome our participation. I look forward to working with you on this. May it be so, and amen.
Hi, I'm Reverend Hannah Capaldi.
And I'm Reverend Abby Tennis. We are the ministers at the First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia, where our mission is to awaken love and justice in our lives and in the world.
We're so grateful that you watched, and we hope that the sermon connected with your soul.
We also want to invite you to join us for a live worship service every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. You can always find the link to that service on our website at www.philauu.org. In these services, you'll hear words like you've just heard, and you also get a chance to greet one another, pray together, sing together, and we even hold a virtual coffee hour after services to get a chance to greet some new and old friends.
If you want to support the mission of this community and you feel moved to give, you can do so by going to the website that Reverend Abby just mentioned. You can find that link below, or you can text 215-709-5095 and follow the prompts to give.
If someone in your life needs to hear these words today, we encourage you to share this video. And again, thank you so much for watching.
We hope to see you soon.